Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today for the 20th presentation in our Launch and Learn webinar series on current and diverse topics. The title of our presentation today is Increased Risk in Cyberspace and How to Tackle Them. My name is Jorge Sumaeta, and I'm a Senior Director of Academic Planning and Accountability, Continuing Education and Dual Enrollment at FIU, Florida International University. I would like to go over a few housekeeping items prior to our presentation. First, the webinar is being recorded. Second, please keep in mind that your microphones are muted. The chat tool located at the bottom of the screen is available and can be used. However, we encourage you to use the Q&A tool throughout the presentation to post questions related to the content of this webinar. Once the webinar has ended, a message will appear on your screen thanking you for your participation today and asking you to please complete a short survey. Do not forget to complete it so you can receive information about upcoming events. At this point in time, I'd like to welcome Mrs. Alice Milliger from the FIU Stephen J. Green School of International Public Affairs to briefly talk to you about a new program they're launching. Mrs. Milliger?
Thank you, Jorge. Hello, everyone. My name is Alice, and I'm the recruiter for the Master in Global Affairs. I just wanted to briefly introduce you to our new track that we're launching now in the spring, the Cybersecurity and Technology Policy track. If any of you are interested in pursuing a master's degree and are interested in cybersecurity, this might be the right program for you. This track examines cybersecurity and emerging technologies and the broader policy implications while preparing students in a variety of areas such as computer sciences, law, ethics, business, and international relations. We will be hosting information sessions and also a sample course next week, which Dr. Alex Crowder, today's speaker, will be teaching. So I'll be sending now in the chat the link for registration for the sample course as well as the info sessions. And I'll be also available throughout the lecture if anybody wants to ask any questions, and I'll send my contact information. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. I am particularly excited about our presenters today. First, we have Mr. Brian Fonseca, who is the director of the FIU Jack Gordon Institute for Public Policy and the director of the emerging Preeminent program Cybersecurity at FIU. He is a technical expert in U.S. national security and foreign policy. He also is a Cybersecurity Policy Fellow at the DC-based think tank New America. He often is invited to comment at about cybersecurity and different TV shows and programs at the international, local, and national level. Brian holds degrees in international business and international relations from FIU, UM, and attended Sichuan University in Chengdu, China, as well as the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. He served in the U.S. Marine Corps, where he facilitated the training of foreign military forces in both hostile theaters and during peacetime operations. Thank you, Brian, for being here. Our second presenter is Dr. Alice Crowder, professor at the Gordon Institute of Public Policy and the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice at FIU. He has an extensive career in government, covering over 30 years as an infantry officer, strategist, and a research professor. At the strategic level, he did tours at the Army Staff, the Joint Staff J5, Strategy Studies Institute, and the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. He's a former counterterrorism advisor for the U.S. Ambassador into Iraq, political advisor for the Multilateral Corps Iraq Commander, a special assistant for the Supreme Allied Commander in, and a strategic partner for the Secretary of State's Special Representative for Syria. Dr. Crowder has an MS in International Relations from Troy University and a PhD in International Development from Tulane University. At this point in time, I'd like to welcome to the screen Mr. Brian Fonseca and Dr. Alice Crowder. Alex, Brian?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jorge. It's an absolute honor for me to be a part of this for two reasons. First, the amazing program that you guys have going on at FIU's continuing education program and the deep partnership that we have with your organization. So that's one. Two, I have an opportunity to share the Zoom with a tremendous colleague, mentor, and friend of mine with Dr. Alex Crowther, who I've been working alongside for nearly 20 years. And so this is, I think, one of the few opportunities that he and I actually have an opportunity to share the stage together. And so whatever I say, I've learned from him, and whatever he says, he did not learn from me. But nonetheless, amazing opportunity. So thank you. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out some of the programming that we're doing at the Institute on cyber as part of our continuing education, the broader portfolio of continuing education at FIU. In fact, right now, today, we're hosting our Cyber Leadership and Strategy Executive Program, which is conducted in both English and Spanish. Dr. Crowther is the lead facilitator for that, and we have phenomenal instructors from New America, from Microsoft, and other amazing, organizations that, contribute to helping us enhance and build capacity around the world on the very serious issue of cybersecurity. We also have additional sort of tech-specific programs in artificial intelligence, information operations. We'll be rolling out programs in social media analytics, as well as cyber threat intelligence. So it's part of the portfolio that we have at our institute that ultimately rolls up underneath the broader continuing education efforts on behalf of Florida International University. So I want to seize a few moments just to put some initial thoughts out there. I'm going to do my presentation in English because I want to save you from my really bad Spanish. And Dr. Crowther, also a gringo like me, will provide some remarks in Spanish, and hopefully we can have a Spanglish or a bilingual conversation on the issue of cyber. So let me start out with just some key thoughts, and then I'll hand it over to Dr. Crowther. First, there's no doubt that cyber security, cyber crime, the things that roll up under cyberspace as threats are rising exponentially. And I tend to think there are two things that really contribute to this really rapid growth. And maybe I'll add a third one as part of a partial contribution to the growing threat landscape. The first is what I call the attack surface. The attack surface is essentially the number of devices that are connected to the internet. That's growing incredibly fast. And just to sort of put it in perspective, pre-COVID, we had one device connect to the internet roughly every 100. We had roughly 127 devices connected to the internet every second. So when you add that over the course of a month, you're talking about millions of devices connecting to the internet. And if you sort of extrapolate that out, you're talking about billions of devices going online. Now, I've seen, crazy ranges in terms of how many devices are actually connected to the internet. In terms of where we're going as a trend, I've seen estimates as low as 40 to 50 billion devices. And I saw one, major cyber research firm out there put that by 2025, we might be as high as 155 billion devices. Now, this is pre-COVID. Everyone out there knows, the fact that we're online now is a product of a global pandemic that has pushed so many more people into cyberspace to continue their lives under sort of new constraints of a global pandemic. And so my 127 devices connected to the internet per second, which comes out of independent research organizations, is probably much higher given the impact of a global pandemic. And then you can sort of move that around the world, in which countries, over the last 6 months to 8 months have gone into quarantine. Far more countries that maybe are far less resilient, far less secure, have also had to surge online. And so that first thing is this, what I call the attack surface is growing. In my house, before COVID, I maybe had 6 devices connected to the internet. When I look at my mobile app manager now, I have 19 devices connected to the internet. And so that attack surface will continue to grow. That's one. Two, there's a proliferation of knowledge or know-how. Back when I was in college, you needed a technical degree in order to be able to navigate the really complex landscape of sort of afforded to us by cyberspace. If you wanted to learn how to hack a computer, You needed to have a no kidding, sophisticated technical background to get there. Today, that's far less the case. There's a proliferation of knowledge out there. And there's also a diffusion of knowledge out there. And what I mean by that is if you really wanted to learn how to hack a computer, you don't need a bachelor's degree in computer science, right? You could probably find tutorials out there that will give you some sense of how you can do it. And so that proliferation of knowledge, I think, is arming, or at least giving, a lot more people capability to do things, whether it's nefarious or just sort of pranks. It gives them more opportunity to do things to devices in this growing, attack surface. And so, again, I think those are two critical components that's driving the increase in the cyber threat landscape: attack surface size and proliferation of knowledge. No doubt, though, when we talk about numbers, I remember I co-authored a book in 2017. It was published in 2017, and I had a chapter dedicated to cyber. The chapter made some, provided some analysis on where the cyber threat was going, and it gave an order of magnitude. And in fact, at that time, I said, by the time we hit 2020, we're going to see cybercrime, the impact roughly, hitting about $1 trillion by the time we get to 2020. I think the following year, by the time the book was actually out on the shelf, I had to throw the book in the trash because the numbers were all wrong. It just showed how fast this is moving. In fact, today we're looking at, in 2020, close to $2 trillion in terms of the impact that cyber is having in the aggregate. And so some stats that Alex and I have shared back and forth, and he provided, which he may cover as well, we're talking about 1.7 billion records leaked in January 2020 alone. And we're looking at ransomware costing businesses in upwards of 11.5 billion in 2020. And so we're talking about these profound increases in overwhelming impact. Now, part of the area that I focus on is policy. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the policy issues that we're facing out there in cyberspace and some of the trends. And then I'll turn it over to Dr. Crowther. So no doubt that the impact of cyber security or insecurity in cyberspace is having a profound impact on the way we think about policy and how policy formation is taking fold. And so some of the most important policy issues that we're experiencing right now in cyberspace are things like workforce, right? So in the state of Florida alone, as of 2019, we had a gap in our cybersecurity workforce of roughly 400,000, which meant that we had 400,000 jobs in Florida in the area of cybersecurity. That may have gone up now that all of these organizations have surged online as a result of COVID. But nonetheless, there's this really profound delta in terms of the threat and the pace of the threat and the workforce that we have that we can put to work in helping mitigate the threat. So that's number one. Workforce is a major issue. Number two is education, right? In 2017, I founded a nonprofit called Teaching Digital Natives. And the nonprofit, I formed the nonprofit because I was with my daughter in a store and she tried to swipe a screen TV, right? She's trying to move the screen on this, large TV in a store. And I had to say, no, that's a TV. It's not an iPad. She was confusing it. And it just sort of, for me, took fold that, I had concerns about who was, teaching our children, the digital natives, those that are born in this, highly sophisticated technological landscape. Who's teaching them the behaviors, the suspicion of technology in order to secure their online and digital footprint? Not long after that, my son, who was just a little bit older, was asked to bring an iPad to school and start using iPads in class. And this was 5th grade. And I remember asking the teacher, I said, well, are you training him in cyber hygiene? Are you teaching him, how to protect himself in cyberspace? And the answer was no. And I said, well, whose responsibility is that? And the school responded, it's the parents' responsibility. And as a parent, I know we are woefully unprepared to teach our kids because we're still learning. Many of us as digital, immigrants sort of migrating to technology, we're struggling with that too. And so there's got to be some profound changes to the educational, platform in which we provide training to individuals across a broad landscape to be able to protect themselves in cyberspace. One of the best examples out there, I'll point to Estonia. Estonia likes to brag that they put the E in Estonia, right? So they play on sort of the connectivity. They have integrated cyber hygiene in their first year curriculum for primary educational institutions. So they teach cyber hygiene when you're 5, 6 years old. They start that process of teaching kids how to function in cyberspace in a healthy way. And so education is another area we're seeing profound changes from a policy perspective. And you're starting to see, even in our state of Florida, or even in the United States, we're still behind the curve, and we're still trying to figure out how to federate and diffuse cyber hygiene, which is different than cyber workforce training, but how to diffuse that down at the educational pipeline so that it's not when they get to universities that they're starting to pick these skills up, but they're picking these skills up in primary and secondary educational institutions as well. Internet governance is another major policy issue in cyberspace, right? The argument that the internet might fracture into an authoritarian version and a democracy version, one that sort of, privileges, lack of control, openness for the internet, and then another version of the internet that's being propagated as part of, for example, Chinese digital diplomacy, this idea that, you put stricter controls and you moderate the flow of information in cyberspace. And so internet governance is one that continues to be brought up as something that is changing, and is changing largely as a result of, the sort of political models that are out there prevailing in the world today. We also have issues with data privacy and security. The ability to safeguard information, right? I talked about the breaches in records. That's notwithstanding the amount of information that people willfully put online that are also compromised, that is also compromised and could also result, in nefarious or criminal activities. Those are some prevailing policy issues. There are many others. In terms of trends, some of the trends that we're looking at and how those trends impact cyberspace are trends in artificial intelligence, something called artificial adversarial AI that can conduct cyber operations, with limited human interaction. They're also looking at AI as a cybersecurity mitigator, the ability for devices or machines to see, mitigate, and patch cyber threats, right? So they assess vulnerabilities constantly, and they're able to move in without any human interaction to be able to mitigate those threats by throwing up firewalls or putting in a patch. So AI is increasingly becoming important in the cyberspace, in cybersecurity landscape. Internet of Things, IoT, the devices going online, again, that's growing exponentially. Mobile platforms, we continue to be far more mobile, and I don't think mobility and mobile platforms is going to go in a different direction. It's going to be increasing, whether it's eyewear or watches or whatever that is, wearables and mobile devices. And then we're seeing increasing attacks on routers, as well as those other devices that I laid out. So it's a very complex, and we could probably we do spend weeks, if not years, studying this stuff and learning this stuff, teaching this stuff. And so we could probably go a lot deeper, but I'll leave my comments there, and I'll kick it over to Alex to pick up, and then look forward to entertaining questions in the Q&A.
Thank you, Brian. Buenos días a todos. Gracias, Jorge, por la oportunidad de charlar con todos hoy. Estoy hablando de ciberseguridad. Y primero quiero decir que los dos actores más poderosos que son maleantes son estados y criminales. Si ustedes son un gobierno de un estado, una compañía grande, los estados están mirando a ustedes. Y si ustedes tienen información, dinero o información que los criminales pueden monetizar, ustedes son blancos también. Mira que el criminaje está aumentando, creciendo cada año. Lo más grande ahora es el cibersecuestro de datos, o ransomware en inglés. Y El FBI de los Estados Unidos dice que el costo de cibercriminaje en 2020 va a estar 2 trillones de dólares o $1 millón o 2 con 12 ceros. Entonces, es una amenaza bastante grande. Por vulnerabilidades para el individuo, su vulnerabilidad más poderosa es su teléfono. No son los chinos, es el teléfono inteligente. Porque ustedes, cuando ustedes descargan una aplicación, ustedes firman un contrato de licencia para el usuario final o un CLUF en español, en inglés, End User Licensing Agreement o EULA. Y si usted no está pagando para la aplicación, usted es el programa. Ellos están ganando dinero de su información. Y hay penetración en el hemisferio occidental, en América Latina y el Caribe, 70% tienen acceso al Internet. En América del Norte, 95%. Entonces, la gran mayoría de personajes tiene esos teléfonos inteligentes, entonces están vulnerables. Para la familia, la vulnerabilidad más grande es el Internet de cosas, Internet of Things en inglés. Brian hablaba de superficie de ataque, attack surface, que son el número de cosas que están integrando en el Internet, y ese número está creciendo también. Pero lo más importante es que cosas del Internet de cosas no tienen seguridad integrado por la fábrica. ¿Por qué? Porque no hay un señal de mercado. Cuando vamos a comprar una refrigeradora, preguntamos, quiero ver una refrigeradora que me notifica cuando falta leche. No decimos, quiero una refrigeradora que puedo integrar en mi red personal seguridad en mi casa. Entonces, si no hay señal, ellos no van a integrar seguridad. Es necesario de desarrollar legislación o políticas que fuerzan a las fábricas de integrar ese tipo de seguridad. Y para compañías, la vulnerabilidad más grande es la amenaza adentro, en inglés insider threat, porque es muy difícil de identificar personajes en su compañía que tienen problemas con ustedes. ¿Y qué vamos a hacer? ¿Qué podemos hacer? Brian hablaba de eso. Es necesario de desarrollar un sistema de entrenamiento y educación en el nivel social, de sociedad. Entonces, en la escuela primera es necesario de estudiar higiene cibernética. En la escuela secundaria hay que estudiar el uso de información y la tecnología de información. En las universidades tenemos que estudiar el uso de tecnología en la fuerza de trabajo. Y después de eso, en las escuelas más avanzadas, escuelas para graduados, como escuela médica o de negocios, Master of Business Administration, por ejemplo, hay que estudiar el uso de tecnología en su profesión, intersección entre su profesión y el Internet y cosas cibernéticas. Y para líderes, hay que estudiar liderazgo cibernético, ¿no? Porque nuestros líderes, puedo decir, en los Estados Unidos son viejos Entonces ellos no entienden el Internet, no son nativos digitales, como decía Brian. Entonces ellos tienen que entender el proceso de hacer decisiones en apoyo de ciberseguridad. Entonces es posible de desarrollar nuestras posiciones, pero estará muy difícil. Jorge, back to you, bud.
Muy interesante, super interesting. I'm fascinated by the topic, and as I'm hearing you, part of my brain is focusing on what you just were saying, Alex, in terms of, you know, to what extent we need to adjust our professional aspirations and to incorporate some training that aligns to my occupation, my profession. And then also, like you were saying, in terms of an organizational chart, I mean, where do I sit and what kind of training that does the first level desk associate needs versus the executive director and so forth. Very interesting. Muy interesante. Hay una pregunta que lo voy a hacer, let me see, it's in English. I know Estonia has really embraced blockchain's DLT technology. Do you feel that BG can mitigate cyber threats that are inherent in centralized networks?
I can talk to Estonia because I have actually worked very closely with the Estonians. I have visited the Chancellery there, which is their National Security Council. I have visited the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence that's in Tallinn. I visited the Baltic Defense College and have lectured there. And so I was talking to the #2 in the Homeland Security of Estonia, and I said, how, you know, we have problems with cyber education in the United States, both with children and our senior leaders. What have you done? And he said, #1, in 1993, we created the Tiger's Leap program. That's what Brian was referring to earlier, where you have cyber hygiene training all the way down into kinder, right, into your kindergarten. And I said, what about your senior leaders? And he said, that's easy. We fired everybody that was over 35 because they were all affiliated with the Soviet Union. And so Estonia made the decision, anybody who was affiliated with the Soviet Union can no longer be a leader in Estonia. Entonces sus líderes son jóvenes, entonces son nativos digitales.
Pero I understand, and I mean, how do we? Very interesting, and then Brian too. I mean, how do we make this part of our culture? I mean, and yes, I understand what you're saying that in Estonia they fire everybody that was 35 years and older. We experience a different demographics depending on the county. I mean, I'm talking Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach, different proportions in terms of age groups and cultures. So how do we incorporate this cybersecurity hygiene and develop this cognitive immunity? I mean, I guess you touched on that, Brian, a little bit in terms of immersing this knowledge into, you know, pre-K, elementary school, and so forth. How do we embrace the entire society?
So Jorge, it's a great question. I want to go back to the previous one, and then I'll come back, and then I'm sure Alex has a lot to say about this as well. Yeah. I want to talk about blockchain for a moment. I think Alex absolutely laid out Estonia as a you know, sort of a beacon in terms of the ability to integrate cyber education and how they've been very disruptive in terms of trying to pivot the country towards, you know, the digital landscape with respect to blockchain, because and I think that's an important discussion, because over the last few years in the surge in blockchain, everybody's been talking about blockchain as sort of being a, you know, a prize. And I think there's some values to blockchain that do help in the mitigation of cyber. One is blockchain's on a distributed architecture, which means that there's a diffusion across networks. And so instead of hitting one network and essentially corrupting everything, it minimizes the ability to hit these single points of failure. And having that distributed architecture, I think, has value from a technology perspective, in that it's not that easy to corrupt the entire blockchain. You can attack pieces of it, but it won't take down the entire blockchain, right? Which is end to end. The second is that oftentimes blockchains are housed in cloud platforms like AWS, Amazon Web Services, or Microsoft Azure platform. These platforms are incredibly secure. And so they add another layer of security on top of sort of this distributed architecture. This has been really powerful in the financial sector, which is where blockchain has been most used. There's also value in sort of the transparency of blockchain. So you may be able to corrupt a particular point in the blockchain, but transparency will help you indicate whether or not that's been corrupted, because there'll be data points that stand out and are not part of the actual chain of events. So I think there's some serious value. At the same time, and this is going to get back to your question, Jorge, at the same time, individuals still remain the biggest weakness. And so you can have this sophisticated technology, but you still have this technology that's very vulnerable to individual or human failure, as well as sort of human corruption. I mean, humans can go in and commit these cyber attacks in ways that undermine some of the benefits of the technology itself in terms of serving as a mitigator, but also human error. And so when we talk about cyber attacks, the individual still remains the most important factor contributing to the rise in cyber crime, right? And the individual, so you can take it at two ways. One, sort of what we call insider threat, right? The insider threat may be someone in your business that knowingly sticks a corrupted thumb drive into the computer and essentially unleashes, some type of malware throughout the system, right? An insider threat. But there's also the person that's unknowingly introducing a thumb drive into a network, not knowing that that thumb drive was corrupted, right? And that organization may have a policy that says don't stick external devices into the business computers, and people still make those mistakes. Or somebody gets a PDF from a good friend and didn't read the email critically enough to know that's not how my friend or my boss writes emails, or there's inconsistencies there, or they didn't look, very clearly at the address that it was coming from, and they click on the PDF in the document. And that introduces, again, a web-based attack or some type of attack that, hits the networks. Individuals still remain a vital part of the cybersecurity landscape. And I have there's a colleague here in Miami, we asked to come give talks at FIU quite a bit. And he usually starts his talk off by saying, I hate people. People are the biggest vulnerability to the cyberspace. And then he says, he thinks, and I think he's overshooting, but he thinks that the future of cybersecurity rests in machines, right? But I don't think that we'll ever, overcome the fact that individuals will still interact and still present tremendous vulnerabilities to these systems. So to your point, how do we then change culture, right? How do we, Alex and I, we've talked about cyber hygiene for years, and we draw that sort of hygiene concept akin to brushing your teeth, right? So how do we get people comfortable with things like, multi-factor authentication? You know how many people still would prefer not to have that extra step of security because it's a hassle, as opposed to recognizing the value of having two-factor authentication built into their networks, or changing your password. You probably, if I said, what's the most popular password out there? You'd be right if you said either password or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Those are still the most popular. So they're exactly. 1 and 2. And so people are still taking cyberspace, very reluctantly. They're not embracing things that we know we have to do, just to, increase our preparedness in cyberspace. And so we have to, it's education. It's continuing to, put in processes and behaviors that will, just like brushing your teeth, will lend to better hygiene in cyberspace. Just changing your password routinely, not logging onto, the Starbucks Wi-Fi or the airport Wi-Fi because it's free, right? And if you're going to do that, don't log into your banking account information when you're on an unsecured Wi-Fi. Those are the types of things that are going to have to be built into our culture. That's going to take time. Changing culture is a very, very difficult and long-term commitment. But as digital natives replace us digital immigrants, like when I migrated to technology, like the most sophisticated video game in my time was Pong, 2 rectangles and a little ball we bounce back and forth, right? So I was at the front end of the internet, and I've had to migrate when so digital immigrants approach technology in a much more suspicious, reluctant way. Digital natives that are born into it approach it far more recklessly and carelessly. And so we have to understand those two poles, and we have to burn out education and sort of push for cultural change that embraces them.
Very, very interesting. Yes, Alex.
Bueno, estoy de acuerdo con Brian que los individuos son vínculo más vulnerable, ¿no? Más que 90% de operaciones cibernéticas exitosas empiezan con una operación de phishing o spear phishing, phishing con una lanza, casa de ballena, o smishing, que es phishing en una aplicación de mensajes, SMS. Entonces, más que 90% empiezan que eso. McAfee dice que después de entrenamiento de 100% de sus tripulantes contra phishing, entrenamiento contra phishing, 18 hasta 21% todavía van a cliquear por una cosa desconocida, y tiene que tener 4 rondas de entrenamiento contra phishing para bajar el nivel. Menos que 1% nunca puede llegar a 0%. Hay alguien siempre que van a hacer el clic. Entonces, ahí tenemos que integrar ciberhigiene en nuestra educación y nuestras vidas, ¿no? Tiene que cambiar su contraseña, tiene que usar una contraseña individual, no puede usar password ni 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ni los otros. Yo tengo una lista de los 100 contraseñas más populares en el mundo. Y hay que cambiar cuando usted recibe una cosa con una contraseña de la fábrica. Tiene que cambiar eso también. Tiene que usar doble factores de autenticación. Por ejemplo, cuando comunico con mi banco por el internet, por mi computadora, ellos me empujan un mensaje de validación antes de puedo entrar en mi cuenta. También tiene que usar en inglés VPN, Virtual Private Network, en español una red privada virtual, que es como un túnel en el internet, donde usted abre en 2 áreas su computadora y la computadora donde usted quiere que comunicar, y otros no pueden ver a esa comunicación. Entonces tenemos que integrar esas cosas en nuestras vidas.
Muy, muy interesante. Tenemos una pregunta del señor Tony Canvas. Can the speakers comment on cybersecurity being increasingly required as a compliance requirement when companies deal with control technologies under ITAR, Commerce BIS? Many entrepreneurs and small businesses and even universities do not always understand this, in my experience.
So, really super important to do this, because increasingly, as organizations harden their cybersecurity, people will go through other actors to get to them. For instance, Target, the company Target was hacked, and they didn't go into Target, they went into the HVAC company that was contracting for Target. And so they went into the company, and then they were able to follow that up into Target. So they were able to avoid the defenses that Target has. So absolutely, if you're a major contractor with subcontractors, you've got to change your contracts with them. For instance, the Department of Defense several years ago changed the requirement for all new contracts that they would have cybersecurity. And now they're going through old contracts that are still active and rewriting them and signing them de nuevo to make sure that cybersecurity is integrated in.
Yeah, let me add, because Alex is absolutely right. I think supply chain management is one of the fastest growing trends out there too. And Alex is absolutely right in that businesses now, have to take into consideration who their suppliers are and who their vendors, because that's one way to breach. And we keep seeing that, evidence of that growing actually. But businesses are starting to build these provisions in. There's another really fascinating policy issue around sort of these reporting requirements, and that is the reporting requirement itself, right? In the past, small and medium-sized businesses have been very reluctant to report cyber attacks. Why? Well, because oftentimes those businesses will go out of business the minute that they recognize that they've been attacked, and they have to put that out, right? So you take a Target that was attacked. Target's stock price, I think, dropped 35% or so. And I think they went to a vote to, the shareholders went to a vote to, or the board of directors went to a vote to remove the Target CEO as a result of that, right? And so, jokingly we say that, when a breach occurs, the one thing that changes is the CEO, because oftentimes that, sort of is indicative of a company that's setting those provisions in place. But for small businesses, it means they close their doors. If you're a business that's predicated on e-commerce, for example, if you have a breach, your customer confidence is going to drop so far down that you might actually, have to file bankruptcy. And so there's been a lot of pressure with these reporting requirements under these types of control, control provisions out there. You have new, GDPR out in Europe, which has fines associated with attacks. You had some of our presidential, candidates talking about jail time for CEOs for businesses that, that get attacked and allow those vulnerabilities to happen. So, I mean, there's a huge shakeup that continues to evolve in the private sector landscape in terms of holding businesses accountable to compliance requirements such as ITAR, right? And many other compliance regulations that are coming out now.
I mean, and I kind of feel, after listening to you, and for sure, it's a sense of urgency in terms of getting familiar, learning about these vulnerabilities and how can we overcome them, and also remaining educated about the issues so I can help my family and my kids as well. No, but in terms of the younger generations, as you indicated earlier, Brian. I mean, they're a little bit reckless in the sense that they are super active in all these using all these applications. What kind of recommendations can you provide to a parent that want to mitigate the exposure in terms of risk in this with these applications?
That's a great question. It's a tough question. It's a question I get from parents all the time. What do I do? And I mean, the first thing is parents, have a responsibility to learn as much as they can about the technologies and the platforms their kids are involved in. There's lots of applications out there that application providers are providing to parents directly so that parents can monitor their kids' digital footprint, right? And I ran into that early with my son, as my son sort of surged in terms of his connectivity to cyberspace. I found him, he was all over the map. I mean, he had multiple accounts on one platform because he wanted different usernames. I mean, no one was teaching him or instructing him how to operate in cyberspace. Some technologies have some really built-in, some fascinating built-in features. You take Apple and the iPhone, for example, as you start to set up family accounts under iPhone, you can set the permission privileges for parents to be able to sign off before a kid can download a particular app on their device. So there are separate standalone applications for that specifically. But a lot of devices like Apple and even Microsoft are building those features in so that you can give kids their own user ID, and those user IDs limit the amount of exposure they have in cyberspace. We're also seeing a lot of the traditional technology providers building distinct platforms for kids. You take YouTube, for example, which terrified me early on because my kids love to watch YouTube. and the filtering algorithm in YouTube isn't always very sophisticated. And so I found that my daughter might be watching something that is very appropriate, and then 3 filter, recommended videos later, she's watching something that is absolutely inappropriate. And so now you have YouTube Kids that has spun out of that. Same thing with TikTok. Everybody's on TikTok these days, and there are lots of issues with TikTok, and we can dig into that if you want to in the Q&A. But okay, TikTok also has a kid version of it that also, has other special requirements on privacy of information, what those kids are allowed to do using TikTok, what videos are allowed to be filtered into it. And so again, you're seeing these really popular digital platforms building multiple variations to accommodate, and to sort of disaggregate adults from children. But ultimately, it's going to be on parents to make sure that they're invasive. I know this is tough. I'm saying it as a parent, invasive in their, especially young kids, in their kids' lives in terms of helping coach them through using technologies. And that means parents have to be sophisticated to a degree as well. And there's lots of applications and user-friendly platforms out there to help you do that.
Thank you, Brian. The following question is, in our company, small business, we have a firewall, but we still receive emails from strange people with attaching threats. What else can we do to stop this?
Hay que desarrollar un programa de educación para su tripulación, ¿no? Es imposible de bloquear a todo. Entonces, ustedes tienen que leer su mensaje con cuidado para entender los mensajes que son maliciosos. Y es que hay que trabajar con el wetware, ¿no? Su mente de los blancos. No es posible para los programas, el software de guardar para todos. And so people got to read these very carefully. McAfee dice que ellos tenían una prueba en el Internet y dijeron que profesionales van a identificar solamente 80% de mensajes maliciosos. Y para mí fue 80%. Gracias a Dios que yo estuve paranoico. Entonces, yo identifiqué 2 inocentes como maliciosos, pero hay que educar a la gente en su compañía para identificar y evitar ese tipo de mensaje.
Alex is absolutely right. I mean, I don't know anybody that's got that $1 million from the prince from Nigeria. I just haven't met anybody yet. But to his point, though, goes back to culture and education. There are some things that you could do to help that culture along. I think FIU has a pretty sophisticated approach. If there is an email that is coming from outside the organization, FIU email now has a tag that goes at the top of the email that says this email is from outside of the university. That tells you right off the bat that no one internal is spoofing email addresses, or at least that no one is spoofing internal email addresses to try to get to you, right? So you might get an email that is a phishing attempt, and it says it's coming from your boss, but there's a tag there that says this email was generated from outside of the network. I think there are things like that that can be implemented that can help, but it goes back to what Alex said, which is about culture. You need to, people need to learn how to read these things well. Email providers like Google and Microsoft are working really hard to try to implement controls for this. This is why, for example, your Microsoft now may have a focus and a clutter or a clutter. It takes everything that it just feels maybe a little bit suspicious or spamish and puts it in a separate, box for you, versus allowing emails to come directly to you that it has recognized in the past. And so they're leveraging AI, artificial intelligence, to help disaggregate potential threats and isolating them for you to go back and still review to assess whether or not they're important. But I think that combined with, so leveraging those sophistications in the technology, combined with the human dimension in changing culture, like Alex said, is absolutely the right way to go. You won't catch 100% of it, period. And so this is why organizations have to be incredibly resilient. And Alex will probably say the same thing I say. I'm gonna test him. The best way to be resilient is to have sophisticated backup systems so that if you do get breached, I mean, I keep hearing the whole assume breach as a principle or a strategy for businesses. I can't tell you how many businesses are breached, but they don't have a sophisticated backup to bring their systems back up online and functioning like it was 1 minute before the breach. And so having, you know, really sophisticated backup systems for your businesses will help ensure that the human error can be overcome by simply, you know, restoring to your latest backup and then moving on with your business as usual.
And that's why in our continuing education program, we have 4 modules. It's Introduction to Cyber Operations and the Threat, Strategies, Plans, and Operations. And we talk very specifically about, you know, hey, these are the bad guys, this is what they're doing. And then we spend 3/4 of it, this is what you do about it. And we talk very specifically about how to develop a plan that allows you to protect and mitigate and respond and recover, because it doesn't stop with the cyber attack, right? It doesn't even start with the cyber attack. There's a bunch of preparation beforehand. So our continuing education does dig into this in a lot of detail.
So where do we go for information? If we need help? I mean, I'm tremendously blessed to have you as part of our team, as part of the FIU family. So I right away would say, let me call Alex, let me call Brian. But a member of our community, who do they reach out? Where do they find more information?
Or hey, they can still call Alex or Brian. How about that? No, I mean, look, I mean, that's what we're here for. We're here as an institution of higher learning with a robust, you know, portfolio in both, you know, traditional academics and professional education. We're here to help educate as much as we can. In fact, we're working now with Cyber Florida to put together a cyber hygiene program for our community, and we'll make sure that, you know, that the opportunity is afforded to your, you know, your audience and constituencies as well. So, okay, I mean, that's first and foremost. I would, you know, lean on us if these things pop up. We get it routinely. Alex and I will get calls from local municipal organizations saying, hey, I just got hit. It happened in December. North Miami Beach Police Department got hit with an attack. They called Alex and I, and we kind of, you know, had conversations about what that ransomware attack meant. And ultimately, because they had an awful backup and they couldn't pay the $5 million ask that the ransom, attackers were asking for, they simply had to start all over and rebuild from their latest backup, which again, there's a loss of efficiency there. But calling us, leverage the profession. There's lots of free online sources out there also. You know, great, phenomenal tutorials in cyberspace on YouTube that will teach you about cyber threats. Leverage NIST and NICE. And so NIST is the National Institute for Standards and Technologies. They have a framework called the NIST framework, which that framework is really valuable in understanding some of the things that you can put into practice for your organizations, but also really good hygiene. NICE, which is the National Initiative for Cyber Education, you know, is an amazing resource to help you know, people understand sort of what job functions are comprised in the broader cyber workforce. FIU was fortunate enough to pick up the hosting of the annual National Initiative for Cyber Education Conference. And so we run that every year around the country. It's virtual now, so it's open. Lots of other resources out there. Alex, you probably have a few as well.
Oh, yeah. Bueno, yo estuve participante en unas conferencias sobre la ley y ciberseguridad. Entonces, para ciberdelitos, en el nivel nacional, el FBI tiene responsabilidad para cibercriminaje. El Departamento de la Seguridad de la Patria tiene responsabilidad para ayudar a negocios, y hay vinculaciones en el chat para contactar a ambos. El Departamento de Defensa no tiene responsabilidad para defender a personaje, pero para la patria, ¿no? También en el nivel estatal, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE, en el condado, el sheriff, y en la ciudad de la policía. Entonces, al local, estatal y federal tenemos vinculaciones para todos.
Fascinating, fascinating. Let me squeeze one question before we start with the closing remarks. The question is, do FIU students have to complete any training for this?
Yes. So all faculty,
Yes, that's the answer.
all faculty, staff, and students have to complete cyber awareness training. And if you've taken this training, especially the staff training, it is a very, very long, I mean, it's a day-long, online training module, which is done incredibly well. We partner with McAfee, by the way, to put our cyber awareness training together. But everybody, if you're going to touch the FIU network, as a student, faculty, or staff, you have to do cyber awareness training.
Yo puedo decir que el entrenamiento de ciberseguridad en FIU es mejor que en el Departamento de Defensa y Departamento de Estado, porque yo tenía que hacer ambos de ellos.
And with that, let me start with my closing remarks. Brian, Alex, I'll give you a minute before we end to share your last words with our audience. I want to thank you greatly for this wonderful presentation. A lot to think about, and we'll be reaching out to get more from your expertise. Also, would like to thank Mrs. Mercedes Ponce, the Assistant Vice President for Academic Planning and Accountability, here joining us today. Our team, Mrs. Melissa Maldonado, Danai Barata, and Sherima Smith, without their support and their help on this coordination management, these seminars wouldn't come to you. I had to tell you, they do the heavy lifting here. I would like to remind you to please do not forget to complete the short survey about the webinar, okay? And also let me invite you to our next webinar, which is next Thursday. And the topic will be, by the way, it's going to be in Spanish, and it's going to be, the title is Alcance sus clientes en línea con Google, presented by Vicente Pimienta, who is a Miami Growth Google digital coach for Google. Brian, Dr. Crowther, would like to share the last words with our audience, please.
Ciberseguridad es muy importante.
Look, this has been one of the most Miami webinars I've ever participated in, and I absolutely love it. The fact that we can sit here and have a Spanglish conversation, a bilingual conversation, it just shows you, where Miami sits in the broader spectrum. Look, I'll say exactly what Alex said. Cybersecurity is important. It's critical. And again, I think it's on us to continue to encourage a change in culture that embraces the threat landscape that is no doubt going to continue to grow. There is something beyond, the technology landscape that we're at right now, and we have to catch up, or else it's going to continue to outpace our ability to stay healthy in the digital landscape.
Muchas gracias. Gracias a Brian Fonseca y al Dr. Alex Crowther. We look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for joining us. Be safe and well. Thank you.
Bye.